Last week, if you weren't here, we started a series looking at the I am sayings of Jesus. 7 times in John's Gospel, Jesus says, I am. Today, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Last week, we looked at Jesus saying, before Abraham was, I am. And it isn't just understanding what he's saying, but it's understanding what he's meaning that's important. And when Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am, he was taking the very intimate, personal name of Yahweh, I am, as his own. And then today we're looking at I am the way, the truth, and the life. Some years ago, there was a fellow called Alec Mottia. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was a minister. This is talking back in the 60s. He was a new minister at a new church, and he thought it would be a really good thing to get to know everybody in the church and also to see what's going on in the church. He thought it would be a really good thing to go to all the different meetings. So he went to the weekly ladies' meeting. Now, this is back in the 1960s, the only man ever to have gone to the weekly ladies' meeting. But he went to the weekly ladies' meeting. And he listened to the lady who did a little talk at the end. And the talk stuck with him. You see, the lady was talking on Exodus chapter 3. And this is a bit of what came out in last week's talk. Where God, well, first of all, Moses comes to God. And Moses says, look, if you're going to send me to Egypt to get the people and bring them back, I need to know your name. And God reveals his name to him. And God says to Abraham, now this lady was speaking from the authorized version, the old 16 or 11 or whatever version of the Bible. Got one of those there. They want one of those there. And she used the phrase, when God answered Moses, when Moses asked his name, God said, I am that I am. That's how it's worded. And then she went on to comment. And this minister was listening to this thinking, is this right? She went on to comment. She said, look, if you need direction in your life, God says to you, I am that. I am. And then she went on and he said, look, if you need wisdom in your life, God says to you, I am that. I am. And he's listening to this. And then she said, if you need rest in your life, God is saying, I am that. I am. Now, he thought about that for a moment, and the interesting thing is he spent many years thinking about that since. And then as an old minister, he gave a talk, I think it was at Keswick, and he said, you know, that lady got it right. You see, God is telling Moses, you feel inadequate. Well, I'm sufficient. You have a need. I can meet that need. I am all you need. Now we come into the New Testament and we're in John chapter 14, verse 6. And here, again, Jesus is saying, I'm what you need. In fact, he's saying, I'm all you need. And that's the first little thought I want us to think about this morning. Jesus is all that is needed. Listen to what he says. I know we've read it, and for many people here, this is going to be really familiar. You think, I've heard this 1,000 times. Just listen to it again. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the way, I am the road, I am the route, I am the journey, the direction that takes you to God. I am the truth, I am the reality, I am the facts, I am the right answer, I am the wisdom, I am the knowledge, the understanding that brings you to God. In an exam, you want the right answer to write it down on that paper. And Jesus is saying, I'm that right answer, I am the truth. And then I am the life. He's saying, I'm the self-existent one. I don't need any food or drink or anything else, as it were, to live and to be spiritually alive. And he's also saying, I'm the life giver, giving, bringing, and enabling spiritual life. For Moses back in Exodus 3, God was going to be the way, the truth, and the life in a different way. He was the way in the fact that he brought a pillar in the sky of smoke and a pillar of fire, and he guided them in the way. He gave them the truth in the shape of laws that they could know how to live by in the 10 Commandments. And he gave them the life in the fact that he gave them food and water in the wilderness. But Jesus is, as it were, looking at what God did in the Old Testament. But he's going further than that. And he's saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You need to know the way. I am that. I am. You need to understand the truth. I am that. I am. You need to have the life, spiritual life. I am that. I am. Jesus is saying, I'm all you need for direction, for wisdom, for spiritual life. I am all you need. Notice as well, when Jesus makes this claim, he doesn't claim to know the way, to know the truth, to know the life. He claims to be the way, to be the truth, and be the life. And that is a massive difference. Big, big difference. Imagine, I'm going to put an unlikely situation to you. Imagine a young couple. The wife is 8 months pregnant. All right? They decide to go on holiday to Rome. They think to themselves, this is the last chance we can have a decent holiday before kids come along and wreck it. No, perhaps they weren't thinking. Maybe that's what I'm thinking. No, anyway, they're thinking, last chance, nice holiday. We'll go to Rome. So there they are, and they go around, they do Rome, the Vatican, they're there, they're at the Colosseum, and is it Colosseum at Rome? Yeah, fantastic. I was going to say something from Athens then, and anyway. So and then suddenly they're wandering through the streets, maybe they are admiring the fountains in one particular seat, and suddenly, the wife's waters break, and she's going into labor. The husband panics. I need a taxi. I need an ambulance. I need towels and hot water. The wife is shouting, get me to hospital. And then he's thinking, well, how do I get to hospital? Wait, who's going to get me? And then 2 Italians step forward. They can see this panic. They can see what's going on. The first Italian steps forward, and he gets out a piece of paper out of his pocket, and he says, I'm not going to do an Italian accent, Mother. It could get all very cheesy. So he says, look, this is where you are, and you need the 45 bus, all right? I show you the... no, I'm going to do it. The 45 bus, you get on the 45, 20 minutes, you're about 5 minutes from the hospital, then you walk this way, and he drafts it all out on a map to them, and he hands them this map, and he said, the 45 bus stop is just down there, that's it, that's what you need. And then another Italian steps forward, and he simply says, look, I know the way. I have a car. I can take you. One is sharing what he knows, drafting out a little map and directions. The other is actually being the way to get there. There is a big difference between knowing and being, and Jesus is being the way. Jesus doesn't just claim to know the way, he claims to be the way. I know the way, he's saying. I have a car, basically. I can take you. That is in essence what Jesus is saying here. Jesus is all we need to know how to get to God. He's all the truth we need about God. And he is the life that we can have through God. He is all we need. Just ponder that. And then I want us to think of this as well. The claims of Jesus are all wrapped up in who he is. You see, you'll never get what Jesus is saying if you haven't grasped who he is. You'll think, as Ken said earlier, you'll think how arrogant for Jesus to say this. How presumptuous to say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then to slam it all in at the end with, no one gets to the Father except through me. How arrogant to say that. If you don't understand who Jesus is, if you don't get who he is, you will think this is just an arrogant claim. However, if you do get who he is, that Jesus is God in skin, the Son of God, when he says the words in verse 9, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father, that's a big claim. In verse 11, I am in the Father and the Father is in me. When you get that Jesus is God in skin, then when you consider that God steps into our world, well, really, it's his world, and God shares, and he explains, and he defines the way to him, and the truth about him, and how to have life in him, then you don't look at what he's saying and saying, this is arrogant and presumptuous. You look at it and you say, well, who are we to ignore what God is saying? Who are we to call God a liar? Who are we to shout down his claims? The claims of Jesus are all wrapped up in who he is. And for that reason, we kind of started last week with Jesus saying, before Abraham was or before Abraham was born, I am. He's telling us who he is. He's God. And his claims then that come on from that are all wrapped up in who he is. And then the final thought, and you're thinking to yourself, oh yeah, it's 5 to 12 and he's on the final thought. Well, this is the main thought really, and I just want to spend some more time on this. Final thought is this: Jesus asks us to trust him. There he is, he stands there and he says, I am the way, the truth and the life. And that claim is all wrapped up in who he is. And then he says, look, trust me, believe me. In chapter 14, it starts with Jesus asking his followers, his disciples, to trust in him. Then Jesus talks about preparing a future home for them. And it's lovely what he says. I go to prepare a place for you. You could say he's going to the cross. You could say he's going on from that to heaven to prepare a place for you. He uses wedding imagery in that because that's what they did in the Jewish wedding. The man would propose and then he would go home with his father and his family and they would prepare a room, an additional apartment on the side of the main house. And when it was finished, when the son had done the work and the father had done the work preparing the place, he'd come back and collect his bride. It's wedding imagery Jesus uses here. So he tells them. He tells them about this. He tells them what the future is. But it starts, chapter 14 starts with Jesus saying the words, trust in God, trust also in me. The NIV puts it this way: you believe in God, believe also in me. Jesus is asking each one of us to trust him. Simply put, trust him. Now the question might be in some people's minds, how do I know I can trust him? And sometimes it takes people to see and understand his character, because you don't really trust a stranger in the same way that you trust someone that you really know. And maybe you need to do the process of getting to know his character, reading up and considering who he is before you can trust him. Or maybe right now you know who his character is and you recognize that God is saying trust, Jesus is saying trust in me. And maybe that's exactly what you haven't done but need to do. Jesus says here, trust in God, trust also in me. A really serious question is, who will you trust? Another question that's kind of related to that one is, who will you worship? Ponder this thought for a minute. I don't know whether you're going to agree with what I say next, but I want you to think about it. Are you ready to just nod your head if you're ready to think about it? All right. Some people haven't nodded their heads, so I'm assuming they're maybe not with me, or they're not awake, or they're just daydreaming. Look, I want you to ponder this, all right? Everyone is trusting. Everyone is worshipping. Do you think that's true? I think that's true. Let me just develop that idea for you. Everyone is trusting. Everyone is worshipping. We all live trusting. Trusting our lives to something or to someone. We do. It's never a question of will I or won't I trust. It really is, who will I trust? That's the question. All right. Everyone is trusting. In our lives, we are trusting our lives to someone or to something. We are all also worshipping. We are. No one lives in a void with no worship in their life. You say, hold on, what do you mean? Well, let's go on it. It may be unconscious, it may be unseen or unnoticed, but we're all trusting and we're all worshipping. The question is, do we trust and do we worship the right one? The question is not really, do I or don't I trust and worship? The question is, what do I trust? What do I worship? Who do you trust? Who do you worship? Let me give you a little illustration. And you're thinking, I don't know where he's going with this. Hopefully by the end you will. All right. Two fish are swimming along. When an older fish, these two fish, young, fantastically good-looking young fish, let's say, and they're swimming along when suddenly this old wise fish swims towards them. And the old wise fish swims towards them, and as he does, he says, "Morning, fellas, how's the water?" And the two other fish carry on swimming through the water, and the wise fish swims off, and they don't answer him. And as they swim a bit further, one turns to the other, and he says, "What on earth is water?" They are living with water all around them, and they didn't notice it. We live with trust and worship all around us, and we may not even notice it. There are certain things in your life that you are trusting on. They may not be the right things. There are certain things in your life you are definitely worshipping. They may not be the right things. I came across this fella, and to me, he explained it better than I've heard a Christian explain it. This fella's an atheist. His name's David Foster Wallace. Now, if you're like Leah over there and you're an English literature person, you will have come across David Foster Wallace. I actually asked Leah, and she said, well, I don't study contemporary English, she said, and I don't do American. So she hadn't really heard of him. But apparently, this fellow was described as the most brilliant American writer of his generation. And he wrote this massive book. Apparently, he said, if you're in a book club, there's this book called Infinite Jest. And it's like a great big slab. It makes War and Peace look like a tiny little paperback. Great big slab of a book. And he said, someone said, if you take this book to your book club and suggest you read it, you've just killed everybody in your book club. Because he said, Now, this American author is also a professor of literature in California. And he's an atheist. Doesn't believe in God. Now, he gave a speech, and his speech is on YouTube. And I'll put the address just there. And the speech is simply called This is Water. Now, when you listen to his speech, it displays and opens up a whole world and way of thinking. And to me, at the end of it, I think to myself, it shows an incredible despair at the world that we live in. And to me, it reinforces Christian truth because the absence of it is so grim. And I want to read you a section of his speech because he makes most powerfully the point that every single one of us is trusting in something. Are we trusting in the right thing? Every single one of us is worshipping. And he makes it as an atheist. This is what he said. And he contradicts himself in the very first bit. It's incredible. He says this, in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. Interesting for him to say that. And he goes on, there is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. He goes on and he says, the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it Jesus or Allah or Yahweh, and he goes on. The compelling reason for choosing some spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. What a thing to say. And then he explains. He says, look, if you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough and never feel you have enough. It's the truth. He goes on. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die 1,000,000 deaths before they finally plant you. He goes on. Worship power, and you will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over people to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being smart, and you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. And then he goes on. On one level, we all know this stuff already. It's in our myths, it's in our proverbs and cliches and parables. It's the skeleton on which every great story hangs. The whole trick is to keep the truth up front in daily life, in daily consciousness. What is he saying? He's saying everyone worships. Some worship money and things and beauty and power and intellect. You worship those things and what happens? They eat you alive. An atheist professor, incredible mind. But as he looks at the world and as he looks at life, this is what he sees. He gave this address at the commencements of a university, I think it was in California. He gave this address, and it lasts for about 22 minutes. It's on YouTube if you want to see it. If ever you wanted a reason to believe in God, His 22 minutes of his address, I think, give a good reason to believe and trust and worship God. In 2008, at the age of 46, because he suffered from depression, he took his own life. But isn't it amazing what he says? Everyone worships. He recognized every single one of us worship, but some of the things we worship are the very things that eat us alive. Without realizing it, like the fish in the water, not even realizing that water is there, we can live worshipping and trusting things that are going to eat us alive. So have we chosen the right thing to worship? It's never a question of will I worship or will I trust, because we're already worshipping and trusting things, certain things, whatever they are. The question is not will I or won't I, the question is who will I worship and who will I trust? Jesus here in chapter 14 verse 1, he asks us to trust him. He asks us to believe in him. Jesus, God in skin. Jesus who in his death took the punishment for every bit of sin and rebellion that is in me, that separates me from a holy God and condemns me to a lost eternity. Jesus who says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, asks us to trust him. Who will we trust? Who will we worship? Everyone is trusting in something. To be our way, to be our truth, to be our life. But are we trusting in Jesus? I would say let it be for you that you trust in Jesus as your way, as your truth, as your life. Jesus is all that's needed. The claims of Jesus are all wrapped up in who he is. And Jesus stands before us and says, trust me. For some people right now, you can say, yeah, I did that. For me, I look back when I was 11 years old. I went to a church service a bit like this. It was an evening service, though, so it wasn't quite like this. At 11 years old, I was used to going to church. If I'm quite honest, I didn't really like going. If I'm quite honest, I looked forward to being like my brother, who was a few years older, who'd given up on it. And 11 years old, a speaker spoke. And usually I'd sit there with my pens and I'd just make sure I got the squeakiest pen possible to irritate my dad as I sat next to him. And instead I listened. And this speaker spoke and he talked about the end of everything and knowing and trusting God. And it connected with me and it engaged with me. I went home, I tried to shake off some of the scary things about that he presented. I couldn't shake it off. So my mum noticed. Mums are good at noticing things, aren't they? She noticed something was wrong, so we chatted. And then she said, look, you can know for the future that things are going to be all right by asking for God's forgiveness and asking him to be for you that way, that truth, that life. Now, she explained it in a different way. And at the age of 11 years old, I prayed a simple prayer. And at that point, I became a Christian. I have to be honest, I went through teenage years a bit rebellious. And then I went on to a camp. Somebody at church had paid for me to go. I didn't know this. They paid for me to go on a camp. And the padre said, look, if you are a Christian, you should be living as a Christian. And then I realized I wasn't living as a Christian. So at 15 years old, I kind of recommitted. And at that point, I got involved in a young people's group who then taught me and showed me what the Bible said. I still actually struggled to engage with church. And then I grew in an understanding. And it probably wasn't until I was in my early 20s that the actual church I went to, I could understand what they were doing. For each one of us, there needs to be a time when we trust. And we either choose to trust God or we choose to trust something or someone else. And right now, you're in one of those two. You're either trusting God, you're either trusting Jesus, or you are trusting something else. And all I would say is be very careful what you trust, because some of the things that we trust and some of the things we worship will eat us alive. So make sure you trust in the one who gave his life for you.